The year is 2009. Back then I didn't have a real camera yet, and I was just snapping away some pictures on the OG iPhone. This guy won an Oscar.
Tonight's entertainment.
And Bitcoin's value was essentially zero. And Leica introduced a camera.
Successor of this revolutionary camera, the Leica M9.
And now in 2023, I have one to test out. Okay, so why the M9? Today, this camera actually has risen to some type of cult or iconic status. Oftentimes, it's even touted as the most filmic digital camera that you can buy, especially within the Leica range. Why is that? It has a CCD sensor. Nowadays, all modern cameras have CMOS sensors. And this CCD sensor was co-developed with Kodak, and allegedly it produces some really gorgeous colors. When it comes to ISO, the range is actually quite limited. In my opinion, I don't think you can go above ISO 800, maybe 1600 before the sensor starts to fall apart in a way. Of course, it adds to the filmic experience, and the fact that you have these constraints, that you need to be very thoughtful on lighting conditions and what you're doing, helps in creating this filmic approach with a digital camera. This particular camera that I was able to lend for a short period of time is actually for sale, so link in the description. And this one is a steel gray one made out of brass. You can also see it on this camera. The brass is starting to shine through. So yeah, it gives this camera a lot of character. I'm really curious to see how this camera, the M9, stacks up to the M10P that I have. In two aspects in a way, so usability, just overall the experience of holding it and shooting with it, and then of course also the image quality part. So let's dive into the body design first. Main things that stood out to me were, or things that I was missing the most coming from an M10, is the dedicated ISO dial. The fact that the on-off switch on the M10, it's binary, it's on-off, nothing more, nothing less. On the M9, you have multiple states. You can put it in single, continuous, and self-timer. I often found myself, when trying to do things in a hurry, I switched it all the way to continuous or sometimes even self-timer, resulting in missing a couple of shots. Could also be a bit due to the fact that this is a bit older, used a lot, so there's a bit more play on these different states. But yeah, that was a bit annoying. The thumb wheel I was missing a lot as well. On the M10, you have a little bit of a point where you can rest your thumb, and of course you have the wheel. Personally, I've set that to exposure compensation, something that you have to do with the wheel on the back if you want to customize it in a way. So having that at your disposal on a thumb level is much more convenient. Then if we look at the back of the camera, clearly again I think the M10 is just a more refined camera, a lot more minimal. On the M9 you have this very ugly, in my opinion, USB port on the side of the camera. Also a lot more buttons overall. You have a play button, delete, ISO, info, set, and a menu button. You have this rolling wheel and then a pad to go up, down, left, and right. Another very important thing: the screen itself on the back of the camera to the standards of 2023 is just horrendous. You can roughly check a bit composition, but other than that, it's really not really that usable. Of course, this also helps with the filmic experience because you're just much less likely to chimp. So in a way, it's maybe even a pro more than a con. If we look at the menu system itself, it's of course very bare bones. I think it works perfectly fine. It's well readable, not a lot of options, clear and intuitive. So yeah, nothing really to complain here. One thing that I want to mention, you can put this camera in some type of stealth mode. What do I mean by that? This is the regular shutter. So it's clicking the shutter in the advance immediately, the one after the other. What you can do is you can customize that, and you can go for soft discrete or soft indiscrete. And what this does is when you click the shutter, the only thing that you will hear is first the click, and then you can move away, release it, and the camera advances, making this a bit more stealthy or a bit more silent when you absolutely need it. So I think that's quite a neat trick, to be honest. Okay, let's now look at a couple of images. I wanted to stay a bit in the vintage feel, vintage atmosphere, so I have two locations to share. The first one is basically the home of my grandfather, who recently moved out to a service flat. In those moments when we were moving stuff in and out of the house, I took my film camera and I took a couple of pictures to document it in a way. And it got me inspired to go back with the M9 and take a couple of images in the house, a couple of shots of rooms, a couple of details to safeguard them as memories for myself. Because, of course, as soon as the house is being sold, all these things will change. And it was my final opportunity in a way to capture those memories. I also have a couple of comparison shots with the M10 just to see how they stack up. So for the second location, we went to the Tram and Bus Museum in Antwerp. So again, vintage objects, things with a lot of character to them, and I think the M9 really was a very appropriate camera to use in that type of setting. Okay, conclusion time. The M9 in 2023. I think that it's quite clear that the M10 is the better camera. But what I do want to say is that the M9 holds its own for being such an old camera. If you work within the boundaries that the camera gives you, or if you can live with the limitations of the ISO, if you can live with the limitations of the dynamic range, I think you can produce some beautiful results with this camera. If you look at the M9, the M10, the M11, image quality does improve, but I think mostly it's about convenience features, connections with different devices, battery life, stuff like that, better screens. When it comes to being a photography tool and taking images, the M9, even after 14 years, still holds its own. If you find one that has a replaced sensor for a good price. I wouldn't hesitate. If you want to go and try the Leica system, I think the M9 is certainly a valid option to explore the system and have a lot of fun with it. As mentioned, this camera is for sale. If you want, have a look and maybe you can pick this one up.